Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He just launched Champion American Values Pact. That's CAV Pact. Secretary Pompeo, thanks for joining us here on Breitbart News Saturday.
Matt, it's great to be with you. Hope you're doing well. Good for you to be down in St. Augustine too. I bet it's nice.
Yeah, it's so much better than the swamp in D.C. It's the good swamp down here, right? Like, so I left the bad swamp, came to the good swamp. So, Mr. Secretary, first off, happy Father's Day weekend, and it's also the first iteration of the holiday of Juneteenth. So, happy Juneteenth to you as well. By the way, it was President Trump who actually first called for Juneteenth to be a national holiday in his platinum plan. I know the left is trying to take that away from Republicans, but anyway, happy Father's Day and Juneteenth.
Thank you. They rewrite a lot of history, Matt.
They certainly do, and so this is why you're doing, or a large part of why you're doing CAVPAC, right? So can you tell us about what CAVPAC is and what it is that you're focused on here? Because you're going to be pretty active in these upcoming midterm elections, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Matt, thank you. Look, CAVPAC, CAVPAC.com, is the organization that I'm going to lead that's going to help us take back the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. But I'm going to work on city council races, county commission races all across America. I think all your viewers know that what's happening in our schools is crazy. What's happening in our local communities with our sheriff's offices and police forces is crazy. We know how to champion American values. That's the acronym for CAVPAC. Championing American values, but it's also a nod. I was a young soldier a couple decades ago, Matt. I was in the cavalry, so CAVPAC, and the cavalry sounds the alarm and rides to the sound of the guns. And that's what we all need to do between now and November of 2022. And when we do, we'll stop a whole lot of the things that this progressive left wants to foist upon us.
So I can't help but notice, I've seen on your social media this week, you've been talking about how we need to all be pipe hitters. Now, can you tell us what is a pipe hitter? Because for those of our folks out there who aren't familiar with the military lingo, explain it for us, right? Like, what is a pipe hitter? What are you asking Americans to be and to do?
Yeah, it's great. So pipe hitter, it's really straightforward. There are lots of pipe hitters out there. These are just people who work hard, who tell the truth, who keep their faith, who are fearless, who aren't going to be canceled, who are going to take a little bit of time on a Tuesday night to go to a city council meeting or on a Wednesday night to their church's chili cook. These are people who care about America deeply. They're willing to suffer some costs associated with defending the things we all care about. And frankly, pipe hitters get stuff done. It came from a phrase, a guy who worked for me at CIA. I asked him about a young lady, and I said, how is she? Would she be good for this new position? He said, sir, she's a pipe hitter. She's a pipe hitter. She gets stuff done. She is determined. She is focused. And she knows what the mission is, and she's not going to stop till we've got it completed.
And so what is that mission? Because if I'm not mistaken, we're 4 or 5 seats away from a Republican majority in the House of Representatives, and we're 1 seat away from a U.S. Senate majority for Republicans. So explain for us that mission and what you're going to be doing out there across the country, because you've already been, hitting dozens of states all around the country, different, campaign events, you're endorsing candidates, you're getting very engaged in this process. But what is that mission that, the pipe hitters out there need to go do? So lay out that pathway back to the majority and why that's important.
So we have to be engaged. I get it. It's hard to watch what the Biden administration is doing. It's hard to watch some of these blue state governors keep us locked down. And what we need to do all across the country, why I am traveling the country, helping candidates in the New Hampshire state legislature, candidates for Congress in Nebraska, Governor Huckabee's candidacy down in Arkansas. We have to win everywhere and always to stop the onslaught, the things that you talk about on your show, Matt. The actions you can see, go to CAVPAC.com, see the actions, see CAVPAC in action. But what I encourage folks to do is, we all have friends, as an example, who say, I don't do politics. Well, politics is all around us, and it's changing how your family lives. And maybe it was okay not to do it 10 or 20 years ago, but today we all have to be engaged. We can't get down. We can't get depressed. We can't walk away. We're going to have to win elections in November of 2022, and I am determined to build out a team that can help make sure that the candidates have the money, the resources, the time, the volunteers they need. I was in Miami last night at the Miami-Dade GOP Club. There were 500 totally fired up pipe hitters in the room. It was a great evening. Those are the kinds of things that will lead to real success just 16 months from now.
So, Mr. Secretary, what are you looking for in candidates? Because one of the things we hear from everybody out here across the country is, obviously the Democrats are crazy and radical, and we see that agenda on display right now with complete Democrat control in Washington, with the House, the Senate, the White House, so on and so forth. But the other thing we hear is, they don't want to see these wishy-washy establishment rhino Republicans either. So they want to see bold, strong, fighters in office. So can you explain for us your vetting process? Like, what are you looking for in candidates? How do you make a determination to endorse somebody? Where are you getting involved? How are you getting involved? Lay that out for us.
It's a great question. So three things. I ran two small businesses back in Kansas before I lost my mind and ran for Congress, Matt. What was I looking for when I was bringing somebody part to be my team in those manufacturing businesses? First, I wanted somebody with character and integrity. Second, I wanted somebody who was capable and could be effective. It's one thing to talk about this stuff. It's another thing to actually deliver it. You need people who are prepared to work hard and deliver it. And then finally, there are obstacles in the path of everything that we want to achieve. We need people who are willing to break glass and work their tails off and be fearless and suffer the slings and arrows that will come from the left-wing media, but to work tirelessly until they achieve it. Those are the criteria. When we find those candidates, we're going to jump in full force behind them, and we're going to help drag many, many, many of them across the line to victory.
Right, and what's your? I know we've talked about this before, but what's your advice to the Republicans right now in Congress? Because I mean, again, it does seem a little bit, rough sometimes. The Democrats have that complete control in Washington. They've been ramming through this radical agenda, but we have seen the Republicans kind of start fighting back a little bit. I've noticed it a little bit in the Senate.
No,
we saw them.
It's been very encouraging. Look, it's tough when I came in 2010, my first time I was elected, we threw Nancy Pelosi out. That was the last time we fired her. I didn't think, Matt, I'd have to do it again, but here we are. It is tough when you're in the middle, but I have watched them. They've started to go to the House floor and challenge these things that the left lays down as facts. I've watched them hold press conferences and work to address these things. When AOC talks about the United States and Israel being the equivalent of Hamas or the Taliban, enormous uprising from the Republicans in the House of Representatives. Those are the kinds of things they can do. They can throw sand in the gearbox of the process so we can stop some of the legislation from becoming law. And then I've seen this too. I was in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Texas just, I think, a week before last. I watched those candidates out working, talking to people across a broad spectrum who can see what's happening in their communities. They are sick and tired of it. And I want to make sure that we're supporting those candidates who are prepared to run through that hole and be successful.
Right. So now, Mr. Secretary, the other thing is that again, people are pretty. You listen to folks out there; they're kind of downtrodden a little bit since November. They saw all the election shenanigans and so on and so forth, and we saw what the Democrat governors and secretaries of state in different places did. We even saw some of the establishment Republican folks not stand up and fight as much as they should have. But what's your thought? I mean, is the future bright here? Can Republicans do this? Can they take that that House majority, the Senate majority, and then eventually the White House in 2024? I mean, is the future bright here for the right? Because I think it is. I think the Republicans can move right back in. But what are your thoughts?
I'm enormously optimistic. Look, we do have to fix this election junk that took place, so there's real work to do there. I hope a whole bunch of folks that are listening today will decide, I'm going to be a poll watcher. I'm going to go work. We have to get that right. We have to make sure that H.R. 1 doesn't pass. It would be a catastrophe to deny states the ability to have voters show an ID. I could go on and on about H.R. 1. We can't let that happen. But when we get that right, and I'm confident there's enough of us out there working on that project, that I'm very optimistic. You saw how many tens of millions of Americans came out, even in that election, came out and supported conservative candidates who were true to the founding ideals that we all know make this the most exceptional nation in the history of civilization. I'm convinced that they will rise up again in November and that good things will happen. It's true. I think folks were down in November, and then they saw the runoff in January in Georgia. It was really tough to watch. But I've noticed even in April and May, people beginning to having taken that deep breath, having reassessed the risk that our country faces, prepared to go out and get after it. And I want to be a part of that.
Right, and so, Mr. Secretary, I got to change the subject here a little bit because, and all of this is important, but I got to talk about President Biden and Vice President Harris's first foreign trips, because you were the Secretary of State for President Trump. You worked in the Trump administration all 4 years. You were the CIA director before that, so you've had a lot of experience in working with the leader of the free world on foreign trips, and we just saw President Biden get back from Europe. If you listen to the establishment media tell it was such a great trip. Oh my gosh, how great was Biden? But if you look at that meeting with Putin, he gave away the farm. He didn't get anything in return, right? So the Russians got everything they wanted on the cyber hacking stuff. They got everything they wanted on Nord Stream 2, and Biden didn't get anything. And then, look at the way he carried himself with the G7 leaders. And then meanwhile, Kamala Harris down in Latin America, again, seems like a pretty complete disaster because the border crisis isn't solved because she went to Guatemala and did a photo op. What are your thoughts on these two trips from President Biden and Vice President Harris?
Matt, both those trips remind me so much of the Obama administration. And frankly, I think they're happy about that. They talk about going back. We're back. America's back to 8 years of apologizing for America. We always asked ourselves something different when we travel. When I travel with the president, the question was, what are we trying to achieve? America first is our policy. What do we get for America? And if you stare at the meeting with the Europeans, he said, yep, we're going to allow an international organization to tax American citizens. Yep, we're happy to allow the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to continue and put Europe at risk. Yep, we're happy to allow NATO not to spend NATO countries to spend as much of their money on defending themselves. America will pick up the tab. And then you talked about the vice president down in Central America. There's no way writing a big check to Honduras or El Salvador, Guatemala is going to remotely solve the problems at our southern border. And then finally, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and the Ayatollah were thrilled with a meeting between Vladimir Putin and President Biden. He got nothing. He showed American weakness. He showed that if an adversary of ours puts pressure on this administration, they are likely to cave, and that they'll be satisfied with holding a press conference where they could smile and say, boy, the world really likes us again. We were always very clear. We wanted to make friends. We wanted to build out relationships, but what we demanded was that there be respect for us and that they understood we were going to protect Americans, and that was the fundamental missed opportunity from what President Biden did when he traveled this past week.
Right. So, Mr. Secretary, one of the other things that President Biden did overseas when he was in Europe, he was bashing Trump supporters. Like, why was he? What logic is there behind that? It doesn't make much sense. What do you think about it?
It was really odd. It was an outlier from the trip. I spent all that time talking about the deplorables, and it was just really odd. It rarely happens that there are true partisan politics that a president opines on when they're overseas on an important international trip. But you'll remember, Matt, this begins. Remember, he meets with military on the first stop of his trip, and he looks in the eyes of our young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and tells them the most important national security issue in the world, and the chairman, or the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told me, is the Green New Deal and climate change. That is a bad start to a trip where hard power is the coin of the realm, and where our adversaries are staring at us saying, are they going to defend themselves, or are they going to just go to parties in Brussels and cut deals that pretend to reduce carbon emissions as their highest priority? This is a real risk, Matt. America was strong for 4 years. People understood precisely what President Trump and I were on these issues, and we made Americans more safe as a result of that. To watch him travel the world and bash Republicans and people who support President Trump was really quite an outlier from how a president ought to behave when they're on foreign soil.
Right. So now, Mr. Secretary, there's another thing that just broke. Apparently, the Biden administration is withholding lethal aid from the Ukrainians. Now, President Trump was impeached for withholding non-lethal aid from the Ukrainians. What are your thoughts on this whole development? It's just mind-boggling.
I'm sorry, Matt. I shouldn't be chuckling because it is serious business, but it blows my mind because our administration provided lethal weapon systems, defensive systems for the Ukrainian people. We actually provided hundreds of millions of dollars of those resources. And we were constantly, I myself too, was constantly berated for having not done that, not been tough enough on Russia. And these folks cave instantaneously. Look, I hope they'll change their mind. The Ukrainians need those systems. We ought to support them. It keeps us from having to put our young men and women in harm's way. This is an unequivocal good thing for the United States and for the Ukrainian people and for Europe as well. But you're right. To watch the media allow President Biden to delay the transfer of, I don't even know if they have lethal weapon systems that they're prepared to provide. I guess we're back to blankets and color posters. This is an enormous mistake, and it just points out to the enormous hypocrisy inside of the media. We're going to have to suffer this for a while. If we do the right thing, we'll keep Americans safe.
Right, and then just the last thing I would ask you about here, Mr. Secretary, just to kind of wrap it all up, you mentioned that Putin, Xi Jinping, the Ayatollah in Iran, they're watching this weakness on display from President Biden and his team, and they're salivating at it. And we've seen Xi Jinping in the Chinese Communist Party has actually increased their spending on influence operations. I think 500% inside the United States. We've talked a lot about these influence operations here. America's enemies are emboldened, or our adversaries are emboldened by this weakness that we're seeing on display here. I think I did an interview recently with Senator Rubio where he was saying, he's the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, he was saying the Chinese Communist Party senses opportunity in the Biden administration. What are your thoughts on that? Can you just kind of tie that all together for us here to wrap it all up? Because I think it's important that when we see our adversaries on the march, I mean, they smell it. They know. They can see exactly what Americans see in this.
Remember the first encounter between senior American officials and this administration and the Chinese in Anchorage, Alaska, where they excoriated us about all kinds of things and said that our two systems were morally equivalent. And then they watched President Biden simply refuse to flex American power around the world, American economic power, diplomatic power. They watch every word. Xi Jinping watches that and says, I'm going to build out inside the United States. Matt, we saw this on our watch. I closed the consulate, the Chinese consulate that was in Houston, Texas. They were stealing American intellectual property and spying on us. I haven't seen this administration prepared to take any real action to push back against the single greatest threat from outside of the country, the single greatest threat outside of the country, the Chinese Communist Party. I think Xi Jinping sees this opportunity. He sees that he's got 4 years with a president who's not prepared to respond and defend. I'll give you another example. They refuse to do anything to make sure that we hold China accountable for the Wuhan virus that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. Those are the things that Xi Jinping sees, and this does not portend well for American security with President Biden at the helm.
I couldn't agree more. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the Champion American Values Pack, CAVPAC, really want to thank you for joining us here on Breitbart News Saturday. Where can people go to learn more about what you're doing, get involved with CAVPAC if they so choose?
Matt, thanks for having me on. CAVPAC.com is the website. Go there. I hope you'll see it. I hope you'll join. Become a pipe hitter for the cavalry. We're going to take back the leadership in America, and we'll get our country headed in the right direction. Thank you, Matt. Have a great Father's Day weekend.
All right, you too, sir. Again, folks, Breitbart News Saturday here on Sirius XM 120.